Hello everyone, it's Jin'taan here and welcome to the latest of my fleet videos. Now, as you may have seen from the previous ones, I tend to put a lot of stock into scouting the fits of my potential opponents and trying to bring something that, whilst not a hard counter, has ways of playing against them. I like to do this both because I think it's more interesting when you do have a chance of losing, and also because most FCs nowadays are kind of well versed enough in the matchups to be able to not fight hard counters. Now in this case, I wanted to try and take on Brave Newbies. However, Brave Newbies actually have a different Caracal fit to the ones that most people use. Specifically what they do is they use a medium cap battery, a restrained micro warp drive, and missile range rigs in order to make the Caracal a lot more of a kiting ship than it's traditionally used as. Normally you tend to see it as kind of this 60 to 70 kilometer death to all frigates which enter here, and I'm pretty tanky kind of composite shell, whereas the Brave Newbies tend to use it as more of a long-range, almost sniping platform for home defense. In addition to this, as I knew I was going deeper into nullsec than I previously have done, and I wasn't intending to just sit on a gate and always have a way out, I needed a ship that was relatively fast so that I could get away from any gate camps or run away from any capital escalation that ended up happening. So after a lot of deliberation, the ship that I ended up picking was actually the Thorax, and I ended up fitting it as a shield rail kind of kiting Thorax, with only two real tank modules on it in the LSE and the damage control. Now before the fight that we actually go into, I'd never actually used this ship in combat before. It was just something that I'd kind of theory crafted and thought might work as a Caracal counter. So let's just look at some of the theory crafting things that led me to believe that, by comparing the two fits. The first and most obvious advantage that the Thorax has is that it's slightly faster than the Caracal with an MWD, and this actually comes into play with most Galante ships because they tend to have a higher base speed and lower base mass in order to make up for the fact that they're expected to fit a plate, so when you shield fit them they tend to actually be surprisingly quick. In addition to this, due to the fact that I had a cap injector over a cap battery, whilst it's going to take a little more micromanagement from my fleet members, I am going to be able to MWD for significantly longer than the Caracals, and this means that I have an advantage in a longer fight, as I'm going to be able to keep the range control that I have and the MWD that I have running for a long period of time. The third advantage that the Thoraxes have over the Caracals though is something that's almost completely invisible in Pythor, and that's that the Thoraxes actually outrange the Caracals. I didn't notice when I was actually theory crafting this matchup out, but part of that is down to the fact that the Caracals have a limited lock range of 75 kilometers, whilst the Thoraxes have a lock range of 85 kilometers. In practice, however, that's a relatively negligible factor in terms of range control, as a single stalk will be able to boost a Caracal's locking range to pretty much wherever it needs to lock. Instead, the main thing that I was hoping to exploit is some of the weirdness in EVE's missile mechanics, and in order to explain that, I'm going to need to go into more detail about how missiles actually work in EVE Online, as opposed to how the game tells you they work. The formula used by the game to give you your missile range is just the missile speed times the missile's flight time. And this is something that you can check in Pythor by selecting the Charge Stats option in the right-click menu. As you can see in this, however, missiles can have partial seconds of flight time, and as you may or may not be aware of, EVE actually runs on 1 second ticks, so things can only change state once a second. So you might be curious as to how that partial second is dealt with within the EVE engine. And the answer to that is one of my favourite EVE mechanics, and that's the fact that partial seconds of missile flight time are actually turned into a percentage chance for it to go an extra second after the initial full second flight time allotment has exceeded itself. So in this case, as we have 8.62 seconds of flight time, that means that the missile will travel for 8 seconds of flight 38% of the time, or 9 seconds of flight 62% of the time. This means that the static range of a Caracal's rapid light missiles, at least with this fit, is 87,000 or 98,000 meters, depending on what the RNG gods decide. However, the weirdness does not stop there, as EVE actually does not use proper Newtonian physics, instead it uses Aristotelian physics. In order to understand what I mean by that, let's take a look at an example. Obviously, if you fire your missiles while standing still, they go at the advertised 11,000 meters a second-ish. Now in real life, if you were to accelerate to your full speed with the Caracal, although admittedly a Caracal wouldn't have a full speed in real life as well, but that's getting into the weeds of things, the Caracal would fire its missiles at its max velocity plus the added velocity of the missiles. However, instead of that, as missiles will always move at a static velocity after they've been spawned by the ship that creates them, this means that they actually move at a speed which is relatively slower when a fight is going on and both ships are moving against the speed of the missile. This means that in practice, if I'm able to get the Caracal pilots to chase me as I run away from them, the missile will have a relative speed of only 9,706 meters a second. So if we take all that knowledge back out of it and try and figure out what an actual missile range calculation would look like, it's actually the missile paper speed minus the relative combat speed to give you the actual overall relative missile speed times the missile flight time rounded down. That means that the Caracal's guaranteed range in a fight where they're chasing the Thoraxes is only 9,076 times 8, which is 72 kilometers, a whole 22 kilometers less than its paper range of 94,000 meters. To really underlie what this translates to in terms of combat efficiency, this means that I am now actually able to outrange the Caracals as long as they are chasing me, and not the other way around. Anyway, with the absolute chaos of missile mechanics in EVE explained as neatly as I possibly can, let's take a look at the composition that I brought to this fight. This is one of the weaker comps that I brought out over the course of these videos so far, as it lacked a lot of the things that I normally like to see. For example, I only had skirmish boosts from a Bifrost, as I hadn't been able to get a Stalk pilot to bring info links, and this meant that my lock range was actually fairly low, and this is something that you can see repeatedly cause me issues during the fight. On top of that, I lacked a Hyena, so I didn't really have any close range control to push smaller targets off of me, which meant that I had to rely on my Harpies as defensive, almost screening tackle for the fleet, and meant that I couldn't use them to rush in and tackle down targets when our opponents started running away from us. Something that might look like a problem to a casual observer here is actually the low Logi numbers. However, I was completely fine with this, and that's because I wanted to weight my composition way more heavily towards DPS, as I wasn't intending to take sustained fire from my opponents, and if I was, that probably meant that we were all going to die anyway. The final thing I want to do here is to apologise to any senior FCs who watch this, because this is probably one of the worst demonstrations of kiting I've ever given. I'm just continually starting my MWD after kiting way out of range rather than manually controlling my speed. That's just because I'm really rusty. Hopefully I'll be able to give a better demonstration of how to keep your opponents in that kind of range where they feel like they're going to catch you but are still just getting chewed to death in another fight. But with that asterisk added, let's take a look at the combat itself.
I think it's a missile guidance. They're coming in.
Okay, then we need to switch to antimatter, switch to antimatter, switch to antimatter, and we'll just go brawl them.
They're so far away.
Yeah, actually, cancel that. MWD's on, MWD's on, MWD's on, MWD's on, switch to spike, MWD's on, switch to spike, MWD's on, switch to spike. And kill this Caracal, then this Caracal. One of the most common questions that people will actually ask me about FCing is how to pick which targets to call as primaries. However, as I think you can see here, I don't actually spend that much time deliberating on it. I simply decide I'm going to shoot the DPS ships as they're the biggest threat to me, and then I start picking them at random. The only general rule I'll have for this is that I generally don't shoot the first or the closest ship, as that tends to be the anchor of the opponent, and I don't like headshotting particularly, especially in small fleets like this, where logistics will likely have the FC locked up and you aren't going to break those logistic reps anyway. Then this Caracal. Logis?
Getting jammed.
Okay.
Range.
Yeah, you should be hitting them. We're still in range. Alright, now we're out of range, Boosts up, by the way, guys. Boosts up.
I'll just go the drones.
Yep. Alright, guys, we're going to swing in for an engage. Make sure you're keeping your cap boosted on. Make sure you're keeping your cat booster on. MWD's off for a little bit. MWD's off. MWD's off for 2 cycles. MWD's off. Get ready for me to tell you to turn them back on. Get ready for me to tell you to turn them back on.
I have to jump, bubble jumps.
What? Okay.
I have to jump.
Okay. Why do you have to jump? Are you getting shot?
Yeah, bubbles jump.
Okay.
I will break the gate. On the other side, scimitars jumping in, Huggins.
Okay.
Brutus.
Shush. Quiet. This is primary. And MD, and get ready to have your MWDs on. MWDs on now.
Kitsune's jamming out the carries.
Elias Gray is prime. Get reps on Jin shortly. Secondary is going to be Raylin. Secondary after that is going to be Tixima. Raylin is primary. Good job, guys. Good job. Logi, how are we doing?
Fine.
Good job. Now on to Adrian. Actually, no, sorry. Cancel that. Onto the Jackdaw. At this point in the fight, I actually feel fairly comfortable with my range control, and as such, rather than trying to kill DPS, I start focusing down on the small and expensive ships that are going to give us the most value of kills if we are able to take them out in the fight. And that's why you'll see me here start to focus on Jackdaws and Kirins and other T2 frigates, which are worth a lot more than the Caracals that make up the bulk of the fleet. Kill the Jackdaw. He's burning into us. Kill him. Alright, we should be getting out of range here. We're gonna let them pull back in again and get farmed again. We're gonna let them pull back in. Okay, MWD's off. They're repositioning. Let's regroup. MWD's off. Reposition. Get close to us if you need to. Reassign drones if you need to. Good job. What did we lose? Can you put a minus in fleet if you died? Following this initial skirmish, the Brave FC decided to disengage, reorganize his forces, and gain some reinforcements before deciding to fight us again.
They're back.
Okay, we'll see what they do. We're gonna let them maybe bait the Caracals and then go in afterwards. Right now we're aligned to the sun, so we'll go there if we really need to warp off, if like something super scary lands on us. But otherwise we should be okay. I gotta say, flying these things is actually fucking... Whew. How do we even survive? How do we not lose cruisers in that?
That's
MWD's on. Ghost Nyx is primary. Secondary will be Sandra Bollocks. Keep spike loaded. We're just gonna kite away. Good job, come on. Good job. Now onto Sandra.
Jackdaw's coming in again.
Okay. Jackdaw will be second. Logi, how are we doing? Kill the Jackdaw now.
Jackdaw's pointed.
Okay, kill the Kirin next. Good job. Alright, MWD's off one cycle. Let's pull back together and see what they... AFs, can you run back in and tackle them? AFs, run back in and tackle them. They're fleeing. MWD's on. Ah, never mind. We're a bit late. Don't worry about it. Oh, what do we get? Lachesis. Okay. Lachesis got caught. Right. Fucking Christ, what's going on here? Yeah, AFs, pull back. Tackle, pull back. Everyone align star. Keep your MWDs. Unfortunately, much like with BWF, GTAC is another incredibly active system, and as a result of that, I can't really produce a good battle report for you. So instead, I'm just going to show you the kills that I managed to get on myself here. And as you can see from that, we didn't actually manage to pick up that many kills, barely breaking 400 million in total ISK destroyed during the fight. And in order to give full disclosure, as you can see, we did eventually lose the fleet to Darksiders, who brought a really interesting Brutix Navy gang to fight us later on. Unfortunately, the fight itself was a lot less interesting than the comp that they brought, and I basically just warped in on a scimitar thinking we could break it, ended up not being able to break it, and then died. Not my finest moment. So I'll hope you forgive me for not publishing the video of that. The main thing that I hope this video highlights, other than missile mechanics however, is the fact that your main advantage as a roaming FC is your ability to have doctrine flexibility. You can always look at what your opponents are bringing and bring a ship that has the ability to fight outnumbered against it, because you have the ability to choose from any ships in the game, and an average home defense FC is going to have 1 to 2 to maybe 3 doctrines to choose from in order to beat you. There's no hard and fast rule for what ships work well against what alliance, and eventually alliances will adapt to whatever you bring. But the main thing that I think you should always keep in mind as an FC who's theory crafting a new doctrine is making sure that your doctrine looks more engageable than it is, in order to make sure that you get fights like the one I just had. After all, it doesn't particularly matter how great your doctrine is if no one's willing to fight you with it. Anyway, with all that said, I hope you guys enjoyed a more deep look into the theory crafting and mechanics that underpin my fight, and I hope it made up for the relatively short video of actual combat that I was able to get from this doctrine before we whelped. If this is the sort of thing that you think is particularly interesting, please feel free to let me know in the comments, and I'll try and do some more mechanical breakdowns that then tie into a fight that I get, as and when I'm able to get fights that demonstrate them. Anyway, with that said, take care and fly smart.